Welcome to a special issue of Make Me Data Literate. I'm skipping the usual questions this time and having a repeat guest, which is only the second time I've done that, I think. But I'm super excited to delve into the actual facts of data centers and energy use with the amazing Ketan Joshi. Welcome, Ketan.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back. It's really nice to be back with you.
It's awesome. I'm excited for this conversation. Sort of half excited, half ragey, but I dare say we'll get to that. So you've just written a report with Greenpeace on the energy use of data centers, particularly in Australia. Can you give me the kind of potted summary? Like, what did you find?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of split it into three nice and simple chunks. The first is just that Australia has a remarkable amount of planned new data center capacity. This is something that has been growing in Australia for a decade, but growing at a very gradual rate. And this would be a shift from that gradual rate to a much faster rate, one of the fastest modes of demand growth in Australia. It would be more new demand than electric vehicles or the electrification of homes and businesses, each individually. And so that's big enough that we consider it to be quite significant, and it has, certain impacts on the power grid. Namely, it makes coal and gas use increase if you don't match it with renewable energy growth. And so that was quite significant. I think we kind of just looked at some of the work that's already been done on that. The other thing that we found is that the industry is basically promising to clean itself up with renewable energy. And we looked into some of those claims and said, okay, let's actually ask, the question of are they actually doing literally what they say they're doing? And of course, predominantly we find that they're not. And then finally, we looked at the whole prospect of gas actually being used literally to directly power data centers, which is a phenomenon emerging in areas like Europe and Canada and the UK, and mostly in the US. And we found evidence of early relationships forming between the gas lobby and the tech lobby in Australia. And we look at a few specific examples of planned projects that are running on that are proposed to run entirely on gas, and also how they're kind of greenwashing their claims and saying that gas is somehow the better option. We put that all together. We combine that with the lack of transparency from the industry around how much energy they're using and the purposes actually being served. And we put it all together into this picture of a lack of governance and a lack of public information about the socialized impacts, whereas the benefits are all privatized to the companies. And so that's why we call for a moratorium in the report, which we consider to be quite a rational return to evidence-based decision making. I think that's the one running theme through the report is basically there's lots of claims and not enough evidence. So we really say that there needs to be a return to evidence-based decision making, and you can't really do that. And then also community involvement in governance and decision making. And you can't really have those two factors unless you don't have the urgency and the impatience and the fast tracking that we're seeing with the industry at the moment. So it's a moratorium in Australia would be the same as the type of moratoriums that we've seen in Ireland, in the Netherlands, as proposals in parts of Asia and South America, and in many, many different regions in the US as well, regardless of whether they have Democratic or Republican governors. These are common. They're very sort of middle of the road positions, basically saying we'll pause development until we can actually put this back in the box of the normal democratic decision-making processes that we have for any other large infrastructure, particularly in the midst of a climate crisis and an energy transition that is not being fueled by infinite numbers of wind turbines and solar panels like in Australia. There is actually insufficient renewable energy growth. So that's the heart of the report, essentially, is we want to return to things making sense, and a moratorium is a good way to do that.
I'm fascinated to have you say return to things making sense. It feels like it's been a long time since things have made sense. But let's just be clear here. You're asking for the dangerously radical proposition of pausing until we know exactly what's going on. That seems outrageous. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
wild.
And it's well, I mean, like, we released the report a few weeks ago, and it's been really interesting. I think we had a really good reception from particularly the stuff on gas in our report. People were really, shocked and a little bit worried about the prospect of the gas lobby kind of having this like plan B from data centers. But on the moratorium call specifically, it's been quite interesting. We've seen some sort of like, I guess, momentum from the climate movement in Australia and the energy sector, pushing a bit more towards the side of not calling for any restrictions on data center development, but more just saying mandate a requirement of having 100% new renewable energy procurement for data centers, along with, some more sort of like requirements around transparency and things like that. Of course, I strongly support that. I think that's a totally fine position to have. But I think that if you want to go all the way and prioritize climate rather than prioritizing, this sort of progress of data centers, I guess everybody lands somewhere different on where they value different activities in society. And I personally value the protection of the climate over the construction of large buildings full of graphics processing units. But everybody has a different position.
I'm fascinated by the urgency angle, because it occurred to me today that it is exactly the same as a lot of internet scams. You've got to get on it now. It's really urgent. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone don't check anything. Just like, I'm amazed they're not asking us to pay in iTunes gift cards. Honestly, it's so it's classic. It's this artificial urgency seems designed to short circuit rational evidence-based decision making.
That is exactly it. And there's a really nice quote from Google, actually. Google recently came and visited Australia, and there's a great article where they lay out exactly what you just described, which is basically, and the urgency message is always framed as a competition, right? So basically, you have to do this before Asia does it, like before China does it, or in like even intra-Australia, there is like Sydney, you have to do it before Melbourne does it, or Melbourne, you have to do it before Sydney does it. And it's just like, it is. I don't talk about it a lot because it would just be me like just going mad, on top of my keyboard. But like, I never ever get a clear answer as to why it is a race in the first place. Like why, like it's just so baffling as to why you need to urgently create a data center to power the function of generative AI. Like beyond basically, if you don't build it here, then it will get built somewhere else. And it's just like, well, okay, but then who cares? Like, I mean, like that's just, there's no jobs. All of the financial benefits are paid, predominantly to a company that's, either in a different country or in a different part of Australia. You just bear a huge amount of local burden, like angry communities, construction emissions, noise. And, if anything, I would imagine that the race would be who can have the fewest, like, like who gets basically dumped with the toxic presence of the infrastructure. Whereas the real race, of course, is that being a company that either sells the space of a data center or operates its functions, that is the race, right? Because they basically understand that their time is limited, right? Like they understand that the bubble will pop one day, the hype will fade. So they actually are racing to build data centers as fast as possible because their priority is to basically cash in as much as possible before the music stops.
Grift and get out.
And yeah, exactly, right? This is how a lot of individuals and companies operated with Bitcoin. They basically saw like they're just kind of like going as hard as they can until the cliff happens. And the idea is that you jump out, you kind of find
Cash
a bigger
out.
fool. Yeah, like, you're a fool for having gotten into the system, but you need to find a bigger fool to get out of the system. And I've always just found the economy of Bitcoin mining to be a far more parsimonious explanation of generative AI dynamics than anything else, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just you understand why they're frantically building multi-gigawatt data centers. And for those who aren't familiar, like a 10 megawatt data center is pretty unremarkable. Like that's kind of the stuff that we had like in the sort of 2010s to power like cloud storage and things like that. Then you had like hundreds of megawatts, which is kind of like the size of like a big suburb or a small city, and those were for things like streaming and gaming and like more high intensity applications. A gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts, so going from hundreds to thousands. These are the size of generative AI data centers, so that's basically the processing required to train models and to return answers from systems that are like chatbots or coding agents and things like that. And that's city sized, right? So that's like the same power demand as like a city. Like this is a really big difference. And these are when you pair urgency with that scale, that's when the real harm starts to occur.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's no stopping and considering the issues.
Exactly.
No thinking about what's in it for us. And that was that was an issue that a former student of mine raised with me just yesterday. His name is Hugh Painter, and he's doing a PhD in physics with a focus on renewable energy. So, he knows something about this field. And he said to me, it's also unclear precisely what the seemingly rapid expansion in capacity is for, and why it's of any benefit to me or society at large. And that's, that seems to nail it to me. Like we are contemplating rapidly accelerating the climate catastrophe for the benefit of who? Musk? Altman?
Yeah.
Bezos, probably.
Yeah. A nice comparison point. I don't want to downplay the serious issues with data center development, which I think are quite material. But in terms of that specific point of not really getting what it's for, I think a lot about transmission line development and also 5G. If you remember when 5G towers were sort of introduced, and there was it was kind of like around COVID as well, so people were already a bit on edge, and conspiracy theories were already, really like starting to ramp up. But one of the factors behind why it was such an intense thing is just that no one understood what 5G was for. Like mobile phone towers, when they were first introduced, there was opposition, but you could basically say, like, you could buy a mobile phone and understand the benefits of it directly, right? Like, it made sense. But going from a 4G tower to a 5G tower, you're like, I don't care. Like, I'm already getting, like, ridiculously fast, up and down speeds on my 4G. When there's no clear utility, that's always a major factor in public responses. And actually, maybe another good analogy is here in Norway, there was a big push for wind power in the early 2020s that got met with huge resistance. And one of the factors there was just like, we're already 100% hydro. So why do you need to build a lot of new wind power? The answer, of course, is that our power demand is growing because we're electrifying everything. We can't expand hydro enough to meet that new demand. But that wasn't laid out very well. Like, the argument was not laid out well. So we struggled. Yeah.
This feels a bit more, though, like people not really understanding what Bitcoin is for. Like, because generative AI is less useful than many of those things, like.
Yes, Bitcoin is not useful. Yeah. And I think also just if the benefits accrue to a tiny slice, like people really, I think generative AI is very new. I think people can just remember, writing an email without it. Like, it's not, the benefits are just not massive enough to feel instinctively like it's justified, the infrastructure costs. Bitcoin is, people just don't know what Bitcoin is, right? Like, it's just it's such an obscure, weird thing that has no social utility whatsoever. And I think that that had an impact on the development of crypto data centers. And there's quite a few of them in Norway, actually, because they
really?
It's cold. It's cold, and power was cheap here in Norway.
There was an interesting comment. Greg Jericho quoted it in The Guardian today that the Climate Council estimates that data centers will go from accounting for 2% of our national electricity use to 6% by 2030, which is much closer than it used to be, 2030, and 12% by 2050. That almost feels like an underestimate. Do you have a feel for?
It is a bit of an underestimate. So we use the same figure in our Greenpeace report, and it's the Australian Energy Market Operator, right? And I think this is a really useful exercise, and I want to write about this soon, which is basically no one really knows what the demand from data centers will be in the future, because there is a very, very large pipeline of projects, and you kind of have to pick yourself using a subjective set of criteria which ones you think are most likely to go ahead or not go ahead. So the Climate Council was actually a little bit more, they kind of looked at the whole pipeline, which is, unadjusted, right? Like basically, let's just assume that everything that's has like half of an idea actually goes ahead. Whereas we really trimmed it down to what the grid operator has subjectively assessed as being the most likely to go ahead, which is about 10% of the projects, right? So there's like a pipeline of like 40 to 50 gigawatts of new data center demand, which is like sort of about 1.5 times the total size of the current power grid, to give you a sense of scale. So like it won't all go ahead, of course, right? Like that's extremely unlikely that it all goes ahead.
Yeah.
But what I think is that we intentionally used a conservative estimate of projected power demand from data centers because we didn't want to be subject to the criticism of like, oh, you're just sort of overestimating what's coming down the pipeline. But what Greg quoted there from the Climate Council and what it's the same figure that we cited in our report when we put it together, has already been made like outdated because the Australian Energy Market Operator, they published a update to it. It's like a preliminary update, so it hasn't been finalized. The new data will come out in August. But they basically said it kind of notched upwards, the projected consumption of data centers notched upwards by I think like sort of 5%, if I remember correctly. And every single year when this number gets updated, it's just ratcheting upwards and upwards and upwards, right? So what that tells me is that will probably continue, and that what we see now as like a conservative estimate of data center demand will be greater in the future, just following the pattern of constant underestimation. And so we had the first full year of actual data center consumption, like power demand data, released for FY25. And you can actually compare that to the first ever projection that was released 2 years before that. And it was higher than that projection. And I think that pattern will continue, right? Where the projections underestimate the reality. And you end up with what people have called the hedgehog chart, right? Which is like when you your projections are always a bit wrong and they refuse to adjust to what's happening, and you're constantly like, oh, I'm going to do a very sober assessment of, whatever. And it always turns out wrong. And of course, that is because of the reality of the political dynamics here of what you mentioned earlier around urgency and like basically like fast tracking and like a fundamental force in the system pushing data centers into becoming operational and consuming electrical energy. That'll just keep happening. So that percentage has a huge range. And so it kind of just having this conversation makes me want to kind of create like an illustration of the range, of the different abilities, right? Because, this is important to know, is that we're talking about a cloud of potential futures here. And, you're going to have this one figure and it's like, okay, well, that's probably what it's going to be, right? Because it's one figure, but that one figure is just the midpoint of this cloud. Of this of this range of possible futures. It reminds me a bit of polling, like when you have like just before an election, and you'll have like just these huge error bars, on like Donald Trump's going to be president or Kamala Harris is going to be president, and when you look at them as like two overlapping clouds, you're like, oh well, no one knows. Whereas when you look at it as the average, you're like, oh, Kamala Harris is going to win because that's what the number's higher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to predict. How hard is it to find reliable data on what's happening now and data center energy use right now?
Yeah, there's three different levels at which you can look at this information. So the first is basically the total aggregated consumption of data centers across the grid. The Australian Energy Market Operator kind of discloses that sometimes. Like they obviously have it, right? Like they obviously have this number, but they put it in reports, and you can find it, and you can like reverse engineer it from the chart and have like a little data set of monthly per state total data center demand, which I did, because I'm cheeky. But like, it would be nice if they just published the data set.
Yeah, I don't know why they don't.
Weird. I think it's because most people aren't like me. Like most people don't actually need, like a per.
I do. I want the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So the other level is aggregated across companies or like organizations, and that is disclosed annually in this data set called the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, or NGERS. And NGERS has, every corporation in Australia just reports, if you're above a certain level, you and it's like most companies because they're pretty big, you report your total energy consumption in like joules, which for data center companies is mostly electrical energy for data centers. And then you also report your emissions. And this is really, really important because what you're reporting in this data set is your emissions from just plugging into the power grid. So you plug into the power grid and you take an estimate of like, okay, it's 1 p.m. on this day, and the power grid was comprised of like 40% coal, 10% gas, etc., etc. You take the average intensity and you multiply that by how much you consumed to get your emissions estimate, and that's what's known as location-based emissions. And it's like kind of like the least bad estimate we have of attributing your impact on the power grid. You plug something in and all the generators increase their output because you plugged something in and increased demand. You will always have an interventionist impact on the power grid. Like every light switch you flick on, it impacts how the power grid operates. And so a data center activating 200 megawatts, of new power demand, that does materially influence how generators operate. And so due to that, we attribute the emissions from that increased coal output to the whoever flicked on the switch, and that's called scope 2 emissions. Like basically, it's like the least adjusted, most honest version of what impact you had when you plugged into the power grid. So that's why I find it personally very, very important that the government in Australia mandates the disclosure of that. That is remarkable. I don't know anywhere else in the world that actually mandates that disclosure.
Oh, really?
That is
We're
really...
actually ahead in something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh.
Shocked.
It's Chris Bowen does not take enough credit. Seriously, like he really, I don't know, if I was him, I would be out there every day saying like, we mandate, like, nowhere else in the world actually forces companies to disclose this type of information. Maybe he shouldn't, because then the companies might actually start fighting against it.
Yeah.
But what happened is when Amazon came to Australia and when Canberra data centers started expanding, both of them fought against the clean energy regulator to disclose this, right? Like they did not want to share this information, and you can see why when you look at their emissions, right, and their energy consumption. You can see why they were like, no, we don't want to share this with anybody, because it has gone up so significantly. AirTrunk has had the highest rise in their emissions, but CDC and Amazon Amazon Australia, I should say, have both had significant rises as well. So the new batch will come out, I think, next February. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. I suspect that we'll see the same pattern emerging for Australian data center companies, data center operators, and tech companies. The third one, this is the most. This was like the strongest focus of a little section in our report where we talked about transparency. And so this was basically this is where individual data centers disclose or do not disclose how much energy they consumed. This is really relevant for communities who are worried about like diesel fumes, are worried about the operation times of like cooling systems when they have like curfews, like when you're in a residential area and there's noise. And companies around the world are really fighting hard to not disclose the facility level energy consumption and emissions data. And the reason behind this is because, it just gives, they're worried. This is my personal suspicion. I have no, I can't see into their minds.
Yeah.
But I strongly suspect they're worried that it gives ammunition to objections and complaints from residents. And they just can't be bothered. It's easier for them to just not deal with that and keep it secret. And so there was a case recently here in Europe where the tech lobby group, Digital Europe, they lobbied the EU Commission to keep their facility level emissions data secret. And their wording in their recommendations, was copy pasted essentially word for word into the actual rules here, right? So,
wow,
a lot of data
gross.
centers are, really super gross, and data centers when you're in the EU, you've got to report all this stuff to the EU Commission, and they lobbied really hard to keep this one secret, and it's a bit ridiculous, right? Because there are companies that choose to voluntarily disclose this. Like Meta discloses the individual energy consumption and even the individual scope 2 location-based emissions for all of its individual data centers
Meta
in the
does.
US. Meta, yeah, it's
That is
wild,
unexpected.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what it is though? It's because there's some great person in their sustainability team who just puts it in there, and not a single other soul in the company sees it, right?
Yeah.
No one's
Right.
noticed. So I try not to talk
Should
about
we
it
be
too
talking
much.
about this?
Yeah, no one from Meta is listening to any
No, that's true.
thing about data center environment. But it's remarkable, right? This really shows that the argument they always use is it's commercial in confidence, right? So it's a secret. It's a business secret, and it's what's the business secret here? There's no there is no nothing you can glean from that information other than they consume a very large amount of power and cause a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. You cannot reverse engineer the business strategy of Anthropic or Google or whatever from the total energy consumption of this facility.
Can't deduce the weights of the models. That's wild. But it's it's the same, when you talk about misinformation and the tech companies are regulating us would be a very bad idea, and I'm like, would it though? It feels like it might be a solution, not a bad idea, but they don't want it because it's not in their interest.
Exactly.
The transparency thing is really wild. I'm really surprised to learn that the Australian government actually forces that level of disclosure, and I am going to have to go and dig out that data set now. I'm fascinated. I did not.
Please do.
Did not.
I have it. So they disclose it by each financial year separately, and I've got a section on my website where I've combined them all into one data set. So
you're the greatest. I'm here for that data set. That's oh man, I can see classroom activities around this. This will be great.
Please do.
I love it.
Do it. It's so much fun.
So let's lay this out really clearly, that what we're talking about when we're talking about data centers and their impact on the grid is we're talking about more coal generation, more gas generation, potentially new gas plants on the site of the data centers because the grid just doesn't have the capacity. That adds up to a ton of emissions. That's the bottom line.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And
correct.
and it's that narrative, that forced urgency, that we don't want to be left behind, we want to win the war, we want to win the race, all of that rhetoric, and it ties in with the narrative of inevitability, that AI is here and you can't put the genie back in the bottle, and it's only going to get better, so the mistakes that it makes right now are not problematic at all, although ranted at length about how problematic they are. But I found out because you posted it that someone I respect or had respected in the climate space, Tim Dunlop, had published something that had quotes in it that were not real, fabricated, that people hadn't said, because he'd used AI in the construction of that particular report. And the whole that whole thing around, but you have to use it and you'll be left behind if you don't, and it's fine as long as you check it carefully. Well, we see time and time again that the careful checking doesn't happen. It's not a thing, where people aren't good at that. And yet I don't think it is inevitable. Like, I think we could put the genie back in the bottle. I think we could regulate it. I think we could turn around and go, actually, there's some amazing technology here that has great uses. This isn't it,
Yeah.
It seems
totally
like
agree.
a marketing angle.
Yeah, and if you remember, like, I this is maybe a bad habit of mine, but I relate everything back to the messaging that's used around fossil fuels and the project of trying to phase them out now that they have become incumbent, right? Like, the world's energy system is fully dependent currently on the presence of fossil fuels. Not fully dependent, but enough that it's a tough it's a tough gig extricating ourselves from reliance on fossil fuels. And then the message you often hear is you can't switch off fossil fuels overnight. And I call this the overnight rule, which is basically, it is a weird statement to make, right? Because nobody is actually proposing switching fossil fuels off overnight. So why are people arguing against an imaginary line? Why is their obsession focused solely on this idea of, like, oh, okay, we want to sort of just click our fingers and fossil fuels vanish in 1 second, and then all of a sudden everything just gets plunged into chaos. And so that is basically an argument about the inevitability of like fossil fuel persistence, right? So it's like basically saying fossil fuels will stick around for a very, 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 very long time. And the idea behind that is to say you cannot work day to day gradually towards the goal of eliminating them. So it's a way of erasing the only possible pathway for getting rid of fossil fuels, which is to just keep trying every single day of your life to get rid of them bit by bit. And it works, right? Like, we know we are in just such an amazing time of showing that it actually works when you do this. Like, when you have this like multi-decade focused project of eliminating a dangerous product from society, it actually works. And so, I won't even go into it, but like, there are just so many examples. Australia has many of them. You can actually reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. It's just that you have to do it both with a sense of urgency, but also like over a very long time period, because there is an upper limit at the rate at which you can eliminate them, right? That is true. Everybody who's working on this is completely aware of it, that you can't do it overnight. The AI is an inevitable argument. I see it as the same philosophy, just at the other end, right? So this is basically a new technology that is toxic, in that, like, it's functionally toxic. Like, it's like the example you cited is happening every single day for sure, right? Like, people basically relying on it as a information retrieval system. And then what they get is back is something fabricated, because that's just what the software does. And then that little nugget of falsehood just gets baked in somewhere. And Cory Doctorow described this as, like, we're going to have to go through like this asbestos removal process over the coming decades, getting rid of like, all of the fabricated falsehoods and lies that are being just sort of deposited around by people relying on these systems as information sources. We are in the early stages of that, right? Like, it is still it's happening very, very fast, but we are still in the early stages of it. It's not like every single part of the information world is being polluted in this way. There are still many, many instances you can find. Like, I don't know, like I write for an outlet called Crikey in Australia
Yeah.
that says that you can't use generative AI to write your articles, right?
Yeah.
So, there's like, there people are still getting in trouble, right? Like there was an instance of the Sydney Morning Herald publishing what I think personally is completely written, with some sort of generative AI system
Mm.
because it reads like the output of Gen AI.
Yeah.
And that person, the article was retracted, and the person, even though the university was like, we defend this. So basically, this a whole argument of saying that it's inevitable
Mm.
is trying to enact the same, erase the slow, careful process of stopping this from becoming like a dominant mode of toxicity in our information environment.
Yeah.
So it's like, like, oh no, you can't switch off AI overnight, right? Like it's the same. It has become the same thing as the line used by fossil fuel advocates
Yeah.
to stop us from just going, okay, well, I'm going to like talk to the people around me. I'm going to demonstrate how that you can do better work without using these systems as like a primary source. You're putting yourself at risk. I describe it as like laying landmines around yourself constantly.
Yeah.
Like all this like slow, gradual stuff of like defending good work and defending doing work in the correct way, in the way that we've always wanted to do it, which is like trying to align ourselves as close as possible to the truth.
Yeah.
They're trying to attack that. They're trying to attack that when they say, no, it's inevitable, right? So just get on board, or like shut up, right? And it feels like an admission to me. It feels like they're sort of admitting that they cannot support the purposefulness or the usefulness of their system, of their change that they're wanting to see.
Yeah.
So they kind of have to frame it as unstoppable to discourage any of us going, hang on, maybe it is stoppable.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
that was a long answer for ranting.
Well, incidentally, you can't switch it off overnight. Anthropic literally did switch off two of its products overnight, like 2 days ago. It's like, turns out you can. Gosh.
Yeah, and oh my
wild.
gosh, yeah, that is an amazing story, right? And of course, what it really shows is that like this argument that is being used in Australia among many other places outside of the US is like, we have to have sovereign AI capability, right? Like, so you'll hear this word sovereign a lot. And somehow the logic is that if you build an Anthropic data center in Sydney CBD, suddenly you own Anthropic's like functions that they perform from that data center.
What?
As if that's like somehow sovereign. The logic is basically like, we need to have these data centers in Australia or Norway, for instance. We use the same argument here as well. We need to have the data centers physically located in our country for the purpose of retaining control over AI systems. And that is just not how it works, right? Because the companies lease the space. Anthropic, for instance, just to use that example, they control the model. If they built a data center in Sydney and then it had like, Mythos on it, the US government still has control over the accessibility of that system, even though the data center is the infrastructure is located in Sydney. And so if anything, it is worse, right? Because it is a Sydney community that bears the air pollution and noise costs. It is the Australian power grid that suffers, worse, more expensive power prices thanks to more coal and gas being used, which are expensive, and then also more constraints on the grid, bringing up power prices. All of that disadvantage so that the American government can turn the dials on access to a chatbot, like that all of these businesses have like signed up to, and are now, you've got like 1,000 office workers baffled as to how they do a spreadsheet. Because you can't use their Claude connection to do it, right? Like, it's just not a good situation.
It's wild.
Yeah.
It is. I was aware of the power issues initially. It was impossible not to be if you were paying attention, but I've spent a lot of time, because power isn't my area of expertise, but compute is. So to actually, try to encourage people to think about the idea that these are not actually search engines; they are statistical text generation machines, and you have no way of knowing. I heard someone, I won't name her because it was Chatham House rules, but I heard someone literally say the other day, who should know better, you can tell whether something's misinformation just by asking Claude whether it's true or not. And this is really common, and it's really hard to get that, get people past the shiny toy that talks to me kind of field.
Oh my gosh. I struggle very, very hard with that. It's my one, it's like one of my biggest problems right now, right? Which is that I personally don't use generative AI for all the obvious reasons. I value the quality of my work as a consultant. I really, I don't want to hand landmine-ridden work to a client, right?
Yep.
Puts me at legal risk. It puts them at legal risk. It's just lower quality work. But the people around me, and many people I work with, do use generative AI, and to varying degrees. Some of them almost like obsessively. And now part of my work, I have no say in this, but like part of my work is understanding how a generative AI system returns results to the type of work that I'm doing, and then knowing how to debunk it, essentially, right? So like knowing where the landmines are hidden in that work, right?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be there, 100% they're there. And then all of a sudden, instead of doing the hard work of like, I'm sifting through evidence, I'm doing analysis, I'm constructing formulas, you're there trying to find the error in someone else's Claude Pro subscription chatbot output, right?
Yeah.
And it's always there. It's always like, a dodgy reference. I work in climate advocacy, right? So we are taking on like fossil fuel corporations. We're taking on issues that have high legal sensitivity, like highly legally exposed.
Yeah.
And so if we have weaknesses in our analyses or our arguments, that is a compounded risk, right?
Yeah.
Like that is just such a significant risk.
Yeah.
And so, I'm there like diffusing these bombs, and I try to very politely explain that like that it would have been better to just do this the evidence-based and consciously effortful way, because the net result is a gain. That is a net gain. Like it's quicker, it's less risky. You're not basically just the convenience is not free. The convenience comes at a cost beyond the environmental and ethical cost. It comes at a personal cost too. That is why that example you mentioned earlier of the Australian writer, using a fabricated quote, is a great example of what I call, a bit jokingly, Joshi's work slop postulate, which is basically the trade-off, right? So if anyone, a line that you hear a lot is basically, I just use it for fact-checking or research, but I don't use it to write my final thing. And I think that's either, people who say that are either lying or foolish. Either they're lying in that like they used it and they didn't check it, but they said that they checked it, which happens a lot. Because people want the convenience, but they don't want the shame of having taken that shortcut. Or they're foolish in that they generated an error-ridden mystery box, where the mystery is that you have to go and find the errors which are hidden in the most plausible way imaginable, right? Like, it looks like a reference. It's written in perfect English. It's just like plausible. Even if you're an expert, it sounds vaguely correct. So it is designed it is like this multi-gigawatt engine of convincing.
Yeah.
And so you are choosing to do your work by using this like system of text production
Yes.
that is designed to be as tricky as possible to find the errors in,
Yep.
or you could just do it yourself, right? Like,
Yep.
um, it just, oh my God, I just like, I'm like, that's foolish, right? That is foolish. You take longer, you will probably miss a bunch of errors, and all of a sudden you're putting shit out into the world that
Yep.
is, sorry, I can swear, right?
You
I
can
assume I
swear.
can swear.
It's fine.
Um, good. Um, you're putting like you're putting all this stuff out into the world that is just ridden with errors. You know, even if you check 99.9% of it,
Yeah.
there is gonna be something.
Yeah.
And then like, you know, I think this is really important because I'm also hearing more and more. I mentioned it this morning on Blue Sky. People referring to the use of ChatGPT or Gemini or something as assistive,
Yeah.
which is, you know, a little bit of like kind of disability washing, maybe I think you could call it, which is
Yeah.
like, you know, basically
You
kind of
can't
saying
argue
like,
against it because it's disability
yeah,
support.
it's like it's a crutch in the literal sense of like I'm kind of using it as support, you know, but
Yeah.
it's not my main like walking. So and it's like they'll kind of say like, oh, you know, I just used it for looking up some references, or you know, just like generating a few ideas at the start, and then the rest of it I did myself. And I think this is really important, right? Because if you held a gun to my head and you said you have to use ChatGPT for something, I would use it for writing and not for research, right? Like I would do all the research myself, write a crappy first draft, and then put it into the system and say, rewrite this. And then I would go and check everything, of course, right? Because it
Yeah.
would just change some facts. Frankly.
Yeah.
But I would argue that it is worse, way, way worse, to use it as the first step rather than the last step.
Yeah.
Right. So using it as like an engine of like information retrieval, using it as a search engine, using it to like extract basic facts about things. All of this stuff is where it fails the worst.
100%.
It actually functions as a text reproduction engine because that is just fundamentally what the software does.
Yeah.
Right? Like it it's trained on so much of our work of you know, people who publish stuff. And so like somehow it's flipped. Like there's this idea of like, oh no, that's the okay version, right? Like that's the more acceptable version is to use it for the preliminary research. But then you can't track it. You've got this like, you know, untraceable, you know, like thing of like errors.
So
often,
either
you know, they're very subtle.
Either you do the research again yourself, or you're trusting its output. Like there's no middle ground.
People are really replacing search engine use with generative AI.
I know, it's
they really
horrific.
are. You know, it's not a yeah, and it's I think it's important to be really clear-eyed about this because sometimes people can have this like, oh, you know, it doesn't work very well. You know, it doesn't really do what it says. But it's true, right? It doesn't do what it says.
Yeah.
But it does something else very bad, very well.
Yeah.
And which is tricking people into thinking that it does what it says.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
works astonishingly well, right?
It's a
And so
deceit
like
box.
what you saw with Google. Yeah. And so I'll just quickly tell you this interesting story, right? Because it's relevant. There's a search engine called Ecosia, and it's always kind of marketed itself as like the kind of green search engine because they plant trees and they buy some solar. And I've always been a little bit dubious about it, you know, like it's planting trees doesn't really undo fossil fuel emissions, and yeah, that's a whole different story. But I was like, whatever, like they're basically fundraising for tree planting. It's just like fine, I don't care. But what they did recently is they started pivoting to AI, right? So they have like and they're calling it basically like green AI. And so the idea is that like they still plant as many trees. They like measure the energy consumption from returning generative AI results. And when they're criticized, the owner basically just says, well, people are just switching to generative AI search now. So we're just going with the tide, you know, we're just going with what people want, but we're kind of offering the clean version of what people want, right? And I think that they're enabling a system where both ends get worse, right? So the information retrieval is getting worse because for all the reasons that we mentioned, but they also have no real transparency around like the amount of energy they're consuming, the amount of renewable energy they purchase, the trees they plant. Like, they don't disclose any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
If they did, what we would see is that in the search engine era, they had like, you know, a tiny fraction of the energy consumption as they now do in their generative AI era. And so, you know, that sort of energy bloat is something to oppose. Even if their individual footprint as a company is probably tiny, they're enabling a shift towards something that is bad at both ends. So, maybe a nice example, going back to your inevitability thing as well. It's like, it's not inevitable. Like, some people are choosing to make it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, even the things that people say, it's okay if you just use it too. You saw, I did a post a while ago about a medical appointment I had where they used the specialist used a health AI to summarize the appointment, and it had at least 9 significant errors. It made up drugs I wasn't on. It left off drugs I was on. That could be fatal. Just that. It left off conditions I have and made up conditions I don't have, and it just changed a whole lot of shit. And when I confronted the doctor about it in the second appointment, because he sent back the letter that was full of errors, he said, it would have been worse if I'd written it. And I was like, well, first of all, would it? Can we do a test? Because if so, then you are not competent. Like, just no, you're just not.
You should be fired.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I mean, but what you've described is exactly my philosophy on this, right? Which is, why don't we just hold people to the standards we've always held them? You know, if a lawyer fabricates a case, if they sat down and thought, I'm going to cheat on this by making up a case, they would suffer the severest of consequences, because that's like active deceit. But somehow doing the same thing with a generative AI system is considered to be kind of a little, you know, softer. And I think that just needs to be dropped. I think the only way that we protect, information quality and our shared sense of reality and, like, you know, facts and like everything holding us together is by introducing really, really serious consequences for fabrication. It's so straightforward, but I really think that it should be treated with a lot more seriousness than it is. I'm shocked by your doctor just casually saying, "Oh, it would have been worse if it was me." Yeah, because that's a kind of flippant response to something that should be very grave, right? Like something extremely serious. And, you know, I'm sure many people have stories, you know, have stories along these lines, right? In not just seeing the doctor, but in many different parts of their lives. And we are going to have to fight back against it. You know, my coming of age, you know, like in this sort of like in my like 20s, in my late teens and 20s, was like the whole, you know, skepticism, pro science, you know, you remember like the sort of like, oh yeah, science is cool, you know, that sort of like 2010s era stuff. And part of me is just like, I don't think it has to be exactly that, but man, we need to go back to, you know, just valuing the sheer social benefit of being correct about things and checking things and like trying not to lie. Like that is as a value, as like an ideology. I wish we can figure out a way. I hope we can figure out a way to make that popular again. Like, you know, from the way it was, maybe not led by the same people who've all turned out to be quite horrible, but figure out a slightly more humanistic and generous way of doing it. But
it's wild to me that we have to say that actually being truthful, being accurate, being correct has value. That feels slippery now. That feels like a contentious statement. That's just how did we get here? That's wild.
And then you'll notice that when I talk about generative AI, I often talk about it in those terms of, you know, the falsehood machine, or like, you know, things like that, right? Because it's I think people still they flinch a bit when they know that they're wrong. Like, there is still some sense of shame about being wrong about things, and I want to capture that little spark and turn it into a fire. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I'm really grateful for your generosity in sharing your expertise.
Yeah, always happy to come back. And thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it. So, yeah, cheers. Nice convo.